Good morning, welcome back to the Deep 404. I'm going to start the episode today just with a little bit of an update on Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and the mystery around his health and well-being. Yesterday, Sunday, where I was, so it's now Monday morning here. Yesterday there were no updates. The Pentagon had promised to give daily updates on his health. What was available yesterday was just articles rehashing what Maj Gen Pat Ryder of the Pentagon had said the day before. This morning, there is a very short announcement from the Pentagon, which is just that he's doing fine, but we have no idea yet when he'll be out of hospital. Now, for those of you who are following this story, this sounds unusual, given that he is meant to have had a urinary tract infection after cancer surgery, successful cancer surgery, prostate cancer. But it's now the 15th of January. He reportedly went into hospital on the 4th of January in ICU for at least 4 days, and since then has not been heard of. Of course, the other story which is being theorised is that he was on a secret trip to Ukraine, a number of which he has done before, and in a previous video I've given some examples of that, and that he was struck by one of the large Russian missile strikes, perhaps the one that occurred around the 28th of December, and was wounded in that. There is talk he may have been killed. At this stage, I don't think that he has been killed. I think that if this story about the attack in Ukraine is what has hospitalised him, then perhaps he has been wounded in that hospitalisation, in that attack. But anyhow, we will see. Another interesting story, because coming out of the Middle East, that 2 U.S Navy SEALs have been reported missing off the coast of Somalia. Now, this happened on the evening of the 11th of January. CENTCOM, the Central Command, US Central Command, announced that with a statement. On the evening of January 11th, 2 US Navy sailors were reported missing at sea while conducting operations off the coast of Somalia. Now, Somalia is just right next to, let's get our map up here. Where are we? So Somalia here is right next to Yemen. If we have a look at our map here, this is Somalia, this green country here. This is Yemen right here. This is the Gulf of Aden. So Yemen is where the Houthis are, and the Houthis are in this western part of Yemen around here, very close to Somalia. Reportedly, the soldiers... Sorry, in the initial release from CENTCOM, on the 11th of January, 2 US Navy sailors were reported missing at sea while conducting operations off the coast of Somalia. Search and rescue operations are currently ongoing to locate the 2 sailors. There was something written in there about a policy that if one of these SEALs goes into the water, then another will go in. So if they're doing something, man goes overboard, other SEALs will jump overboard with them because they're all very good and capable in the water and should be able to look after one another in the water. I guess that's the thinking there anyhow. So a subsequent bit of information came out that reportedly one of them went in the water and the other then followed them into the water. What came out yesterday was that, as I said, they weren't just Navy sailors, as was first mentioned, but they were Navy SEALs, and that they may have fallen into the water during a nighttime boarding mission. They were boarding a vessel in the Gulf of Aden. Now, again, things starting to come out, the story changing slightly. Initially, they were off the coast of Somalia, which, as we say here, just make so we might be able to see that. So off the coast of Somalia would put you down here somewhere. It is in the Gulf of Aden. The Gulf of Aden really around this area here. So could be anywhere in there. But now they're reporting that it was in the Gulf of Aden, not necessarily off the coast of Somalia. It is unclear what had prompted them to board a vessel. So apparently they were boarding a vessel and then they fell from the vessel while they were attempting to board that vessel. Unclear why they were boarding the vessel. unclear what vessel they were boarding or what had actually happened, but reporting is that search operations for those two men continue. There was some comments that the water temperature at that time is warm in the area in the Gulf of Aden. So there are a couple of things, I guess, which are worth speculating on here. And this is, of course, this is speculation. One is that this happened on the 11th. It's now the 15th. And there, at this stage, hasn't been reports of the men being found. So you do wonder what actually they were doing if they went into water with the comment that the water temperature was quite good. This isn't like this is in the North Sea in wintertime when the water temperatures would be freezing and you might have a few minutes, maybe, or depending on what you're wearing, an hour that you could survive in the water without assistance. The impression that I'm getting here is that these water conditions were favourable. I would have imagined that these guys would have had some sort of alerting identification, sort of like an EPIRB or something that they could press if they got into trouble to indicate where they were. I don't think that would necessarily be a security risk to do that, because if they were captured, that EPIRB is just going to send a signal out. It's not receiving anything. It's just sending a signal out to say, hey, this is where I am. And they haven't been recovered. There has also been talk, obviously there's been talk from some Yemeni sources and channels that they had engaged some US ships and that they believe they had struck them. These things haven't been corroborated or confirmed, of course. There had even been some talk about perhaps an attack on a helicopter in the area, like a US helicopter. None of this has been confirmed, but people are beginning to question just what happened to these soldiers. Did they simply fall off a vessel they were boarding? Why were they boarding at night time? Why haven't they been found? These type of things. So look, I guess we will learn more about this in the future. But again, an interesting development in that part of the world. In other news, the UK, Rishi Sunak has been to Kiev to speak to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And he's been there to talk about a UK security guarantee. The guarantee covers off a number of different areas of cooperation between Ukraine and the UK. It talks about returning the borders back to the 1991 borders. It talks about the investment in ongoing maritime and fleet development in Ukraine so that Ukraine can become what they term a net security contributor across the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. It talks about future development in industry by the UK, investment with Ukraine. A number of those things that it speaks about I think are interesting. I'll come back to in just a moment. It also talks about an increase in funding that the UK will provide to Ukraine. So for the past 2 years, the UK has provided about $2.3 billion of aid to Ukraine, spread military aid. And in 2024, they're increasing that to $2.5 billion, so a $200 million increase. There is also recent commitment from Rishi Sunak to provide a large number of drones to the Ukrainians. Now, the supply of the drones from the UK is important because these are going to be drones produced in the UK and provided to Ukraine. The reason that this is important is because of the recent missile strikes undertaken by the Russians, these large ones, 130 or so missiles in a couple of those individual strikes at the end of December and into early January. Now, the Russians continue with strikes of smaller scale since then and with drone strikes. But it's important because those drones being produced in the UK means they're not going to be produced in Ukraine, because what has been targeted seemingly successfully in the last few weeks of missile strikes has been Ukrainian manufacturing facilities for the manufacture of drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, flying drones, unmanned watercraft as well, sea drones. So the UK looking to support Ukraine by building drones safely in the UK and then shipping them across to be used. And the drones they're talking about being a range of different types of reconnaissance and strike drones. The two interesting things that I noted there was that the agreement talks about returning to the 1991 borders, and it talks about maritime development and fleet development for Ukraine. Now, those 2 points are two which I think there may be challenges with, because I don't imagine there has been any conference with the Russians about what the Russians feel about the return of Ukraine to its 1991 borders, or the development of a Ukrainian fleet so that it can be a security contributor across the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. The agreement spans a 10-year period, and it has elements in it like that, which when I look at it, it makes me feel that this is more of a PR stunt than perhaps a real commitment to Ukraine. And the reason that I say that is because it feels to me far more likely that Russia will be in a position in the coming years to say, no, we're not returning to the 1991 borders. We will be establishing new borders in Ukraine that Russia is happy with. And the strong likelihood, I believe, that those new borders will include the port areas in the south of Ukraine of Mykolaiv and the southern areas of Odessa, and that Russia would be strategically senseless to leave those port areas open to Ukrainian control. When this conflict resolves itself, I think it's far more likely that the Russians will assume control of the entire port area of Ukraine, depriving what remains of Ukraine of port access, thus limiting Ukraine in what it can do. Naval development is out of the picture. So a couple of the things that are in this guarantee announced by the UK, I think, are unlikely to be enacted. Also, Point 7 in the document, so high up in the document, it's got quite a few pages long, but pretty high up is a statement in there talking about, actually I might even, if I've got it here, just read it. Point 7 here. The participants will seek to ensure that Ukraine's military capabilities are at such a level that, in the event of external military aggression against the United Kingdom, Ukraine is able to provide effective military assistance. The terms, format and scope of such assistance will be determined by the participants. So the quid pro quo, we're going to give you this money and we're going to help you grow in these areas. Some of them we probably won't be able to help you in, but we're going to say that we will. The deal is, if anyone gives us any strife in the future, you're now locked in to coming to support us, and we're going to have quite a lot of control over you, seeing how we've funded you and we've given you weapons. So Ukrainians, those of you who are left, you will be coming to fight to support the UK now. It's an interesting agreement. Now, Ukraine, its air defence challenges continue to grow. The front line of fighting in the Ukraine is about 930 miles long, nearly 1,000 miles long, 1,500 kilometres long. So that's obviously a very long front line to try to secure with air defence at the front line. And of course, Ukraine isn't just securing the front line, it's also requiring to secure all of its major cities and locations and rail lines and infrastructure behind the front line. So it has a large area with which it is trying to defend from Russian missile and drone attacks. Western analysts now corroborating what the Russian Ministry of Defence said in its summary of the missile attacks, where they said they were targeting manufacture, assembly and repair centres for the war effort in Ukraine. So Western analysts now suggesting that Ukraine's own weapons manufacturing capabilities are among Russia's recent targets. Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Yuri Inat says, Russia's recent escalation of missile and drone attacks is stretching Ukraine's air defence resources. Intense Russian air attacks force us to use a corresponding amount of air defence means, he said in a televised interview. That's why we need more of them, as Russia keeps increasing its air attack capabilities. So again, we're not hearing things from the Ukrainians here that Russia is running out of missiles or running out of drones. Instead, the spokesman for the Air Force is saying that Russia is increasing its air attack capabilities. At the moment, he goes on, we are completely dependent on the supply of guided air defence missiles for both Soviet and Western systems. So this is a telling point. So Ukraine is completely dependent on the supply of guided air missile defence systems. So I guess what he might mean here is that in terms of perhaps, the non-guided, the smaller things, the man-pad type of devices, which Ukrainian infantry could mount on their shoulder and fire at things like a drone, a Uranium-2 drone, those ones based on the Iranian Shahed design. The newer jet version of those travels at 500 kilometers an hour. That may well, I imagine, still be within the range of a man-pad device. But when they're talking about guided air defence missile systems, so here, sort of Patriot, NASAMS, all of those big, modern, capable air defence systems, ones that might have a chance of taking out cruise missiles and some of their Russian ballistic missiles. He's stating openly that they are completely dependent on the supply of those. So if they are not getting them from the NATO, EU and US nations, they're not able to produce them themselves. As the Russian strikes increase, the requirement for the Ukrainians to use more and more of the missiles they have also increases. So there are a number of components to these air defence systems. In something like a Patriot, I think you've got maybe 5 or 8 different mobile units which form that. So there are launchers. You might have 3 or 4 launcher units which have the missiles on the back of them. You have a command and control truck. You have a couple of radar trucks, different ones there. You probably have a power generator unit. So altogether there's maybe, as I say, somewhere between 5 or 8 of these units which make up an air defence system, depending on how many launchers you have in there. So losing a launcher is probably the least of your worries. If a launcher is struck and you lose the missiles on that, well, it's relatively easy to get another launcher created, I imagine. You still have other launchers which can fire interceptor missiles. But if you lose the command and control center, that's going to shut you down for a while. If you lose a radar out of that unit, that might shut you down for quite some time, because having to have making a radar unit is going to be a very complex activity, take time, cost a lot, and you may not have heaps of those sitting around in reserve. And regardless, even if you don't lose any of those components, if you are getting increasing numbers of missiles coming your way, which you need to defend, you are going to be burning through your interceptor missiles at an increasing rate. Some of these interceptor missiles, these NATO or US ones, I believe are worth upwards of $4 million per interceptor. So if you have one missile coming in, and we've had comments from the Ukrainian Air Force and Air Defence spokesperson before, stating that they need to fire 2 or 3 of these sometimes in order to achieve success, then you might sometimes be firing $8 or $12 million worth of interceptor missiles to intercept one incoming Russian missile. It's very expensive, chewing through them very quickly. It's a separate thing. The Tomahawk missiles that were fired at Yemen last week by the US, apparently 80 Tomahawk missiles were fired, and that 80 Tomahawk missiles equates to 1 year's worth of Tomahawk missiles that the Navy receives. So in Ukraine, where they've had nearly 2 years of fighting now and using up missiles and using them up now at an increasing rate, and with Ukraine being dependent upon the supply of those from the West, and with the US now supplying missiles to help support and defend Israel, you can see there's just not enough missiles to go around and sustain this. So the air defense system is going to be being stretched, as the Ukrainians are saying themselves here. Now, yes, that's right. So $4 million per missile, and for some of the launcher units, they're $10 million each. $10 million for a Patriot launcher system. Reports from Sergei Naev, who's commander of the Joint Forces of the Armed Forces in Ukraine, who's overseeing mobile air defences in the northern Ukraine and Kiev, says Ukraine has enough ammunition for its man-portable air defence systems to withstand the next few powerful attacks. So here I imagine this is when the Russians send over 50 or 80 or 90 or 100 uranium-2 drones in a swarmed attack. He believes that they have enough man-portable air systems to withstand the next few of those, but then they will be running low on those as well as the guided ones launched from the more advanced Patriot-type systems. Night before last, Ukraine reported 40 drones or missiles were fired. They were mostly drones, 40 drones, I think 8 missiles. They claim to have destroyed 8 missiles and 20 of the drones, either by electronic warfare, disabling them. So even if you take the Ukrainian report, 20 of the drones or missiles made their targets. Russia claims that all targets were hit. And their targets were manufacturers of shells, gunpowder, and unmanned aerial vehicles in that smaller attack. Now, Russia claims all targets were hit. They don't claim that all missiles made it through. So maybe both of these reports are true, where the Ukrainians are saying that of the 48 items sent, they destroyed or disabled 28 of them. So maybe 20 of them got through, but they were across all the targets that the Russians were looking at, perhaps. Again, Russians now targeting shell and gunpowder manufacturing locations within Ukraine. This is also a problem because the EU had promised to provide Ukraine 1 million 155mm shells by March. We're now midway through January, so we've got 6 weeks till March. And at this stage, the EU has been able to provide about a third of that. 300,000 155mm shells have been provided. So somewhere near 700,000 are still outstanding, and they've got 6 weeks to find them. Otherwise, they will meet that agreement to have provided them. Russia now destroying shell and gunpowder manufacturing facilities within Ukraine. Did those attacks, which occurred last night, seem to be mostly in the northern oblasts around Sumy, Chernihiv, and the Kiev area? And now a report just from yesterday, and this is from a Ukrainian channel, which is usually very reliable in its reporting. This channel seems to have a source within the Ukrainian government or military somewhere. Alexander Mercouris from the Duran has spoken about this source before and believes that it is either controlled by or is approved to send out the information it does, perhaps by General Zaluzhny. Anyhow, what they are saying is that our source in the OP, which is the Office of the President, said that the enemy carried out, the enemy being the Russians in this case, this is a Ukrainian statement. Our source in the OP is saying that the Russians carried out the latest missile attacks on military facilities and airfields that are being prepared to host F-16s. So this is the night after the earlier report I was talking about, where the 40 drones went to hit the manufacturing centres of shells, gunpowder and unmanned aerial vehicles. Last night, airfields that are being prepared to host F-16s, serious destruction of the runway in the Khmelnytsky and Ivano-Frankivsk regions. Now, the Khmelnytsky region, the airport there, is the one that the Su-24s, it's their primary base. And the Su-24s are the Ukrainian aircraft that are capable of carrying Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. Now, the difference between the Su-24s and the F-16s seems to be the Su-24s are a far more rugged aircraft. They're less fragile. They are able to use improvised airstrips. So they can use a closed down motorway, a section of that, and use that to take off and land. And this allows them to airfield hop every 24 hours. Apparently they are moving around, making it difficult for the Russians to know where they are and to be able to strike them. The F-16s, on the other hand, reportedly, and I'm not an F-16 specialist or a pilot or an air crewman or anything like that, but from what I've read and understand, they have higher requirements in terms of the quality of the surface on which they take off and land. Part of that reason being the big single air scoop intake underneath them. They don't like any debris coming in there, so they like a long, clean runway. So this overnight destruction or serious destruction of the runway in the Khmelnytsky region means that airfield where the Su-24s normally take off from, that has now suffered destruction, which will limit where the F-16s are able to take off from and likely delay them. It goes on to say, in addition, repair and technical hangars were destroyed, which will cause a delay in the process of Ukraine's readiness to use Western fighters. At the end of this, I'll just throw in a comment. So a comment from Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, just one line that he had said in a recent interview: "We retain the strategic initiative along the entire line of contact." And I think this is sort of what I just want to summarise with what I've said thus far, is that in all the reporting that is coming out at this stage, it is appearing as though the Russians are solidifying what has been tactical initiative along the entire front line. That seems now to be building up into a more strategic position, with these Russian missile strikes in the rear, behind the front line, targeting air defence systems and manufacturing, assembly and repair centres. This all seems now to be weakening the Ukrainian ability to sustain activity at the front line. There's a comment from another, this is a Russian channel, Russian Telegram channel, but I'll just read the very brief note from it. The channel that this has come from is again a reliable one which has been used multiple times and generally has reliable information. But they just say here, the relative calm in Avdiivka has ceased. For days now, there has been an intensification of artillery duels in several areas. The Ukrainian armed forces have practically no counter-battery work. So over the last few weeks, over the last 8 weeks or so, the Russians provide their daily summary of activity, in that they report what they believe to be the losses to the Ukrainian equipment. And that includes things like artillery. Now, 2 weeks ago, the weekly total was 116 pieces of artillery lost, and there was a number of counter-battery radars reportedly lost. In this week's weekly summary, the number of artillery pieces has dropped to 54. Now, I don't think that is because the Ukrainians have managed in a week to somehow gain power and overpower the Russians. Instead, I imagine what has happened here is that we've reached sort of a saturation point where the missile strikes on repair facilities, the ongoing Russian counter-battery efforts has begun to overwhelm the Ukrainian ability to mount counter-battery attacks on the Russians, and that the decrease in the reported number of pieces of artillery destroyed is because the Ukrainians aren't able to replace the pieces that were destroyed to the same rate that they were previously, and that the Ukrainians are now starting on that slide where they have less and less artillery. They have less ability to destroy the Russian artillery because they're losing their ANTPQ counter-battery radars, so they can't detect where the Russians are firing from. The Russians, not losing that ability, are now more able to target the Ukrainian ones. And we see this report that from Avdiivka, the Ukrainian armed forces have practically no counter-battery work. So that does give the indication, if this is true, that around Avdiivka, the Ukrainian ability to detect Russian artillery and locate it is being degraded, and the Russians are able to then just inflict more damage on the Ukrainian artillery. And that may be why we've seen that decrease in the number of reported losses in that week. But overall, we just see that the air defence situation and artillery situation for the Ukrainians seems to be declining rapidly. Just a little bit on the Orlan drones. Now, the Orlan drones, these are those drones that look like a small little single-wing Cessna, 1.5 meters across, or nearly 2 meters across. They have been used extensively, primarily as a reconnaissance drone, is how they seem to operate. Russia is reportedly ramping up the production of the Orlans. They're manufactured by the STC, or the Special Technology Center. They often operate in teams of 3. So they will have a reconnaissance Orlan will go out, a second Orlan will go out, and that will fly in a electronic warfare countermeasure mode. So it will try to disrupt enemy electronic warfare measures so that the reconnaissance drone can continue to operate. And then they may have a third, which will go up and I guess sit behind them to some extent. And it will be a data relay, which will allow the first 2 Orlans to extend their range. So I don't know, the Orlan might have a range of, I don't know, say 60 kilometers or something that it can send its signal. So if it flies out to say 50 kilometers, but then a data repeater is 50 kilometers behind it, they can now extend their range out to 100 kilometers or something like that. These are relatively cheap. They're $120,000 or thereabout, which gets you 2 Orlans and a launcher unit for them. They have an operational ceiling of 5,000 metres, so they can go up 5 kilometres, which is a long way. I doubt you would be able to detect them with the naked eye at that height, given how small they are. A range of 110 kilometres. They can stay in the sky for 16 hours. They have a top speed of 150 kilometres per hour, and they have a 6 kilogram payload. So they can be used to carry a weapon as well, I guess like a grenade or something. They have thermal, infrared, and FPV capabilities, so they can be piloted, and the pilot can sit back that 110 kilometres and watch what's going on and steer them that way. Newer models have laser designators, so they can actually fly around, detect a target, fire a laser onto that target, painting the target it's called, which then allows other weapons to determine exactly where the target is and guide themselves in on where that laser is. This is a comment now from a Ukrainian commander of an assault brigade, Andriy Beletsky. He says that the Orlans are an issue for the Ukrainian forces, saying, First and foremost, I'm talking about Orlan, since it is a big problem for us. This is a problem for many reasons. These unmanned area vehicles may be used for adjusting of artillery fire, different types of reconnaissance, because they are also radio-electronic reconnaissance complexes. We cannot successfully jam the Orlan UAV, and this might be because they have the accompanying electronic warfare countermeasure one operating with it. Though it can definitely be shot down with a Strela 10 or, for instance, for more complex systems like the Tor anti-aircraft system. But we face a great deficit of air defence, mainly front-line air defence. So we're hearing the Ukrainians struggling on the front line with air defence. We know that they're starting to struggle in the cities with air defence as well, because there are videos coming out indicating that strikes on cities like Kiev are being successful. This UAV is a huge problem because sometimes during the day and at night, 11 Orlan UAVs may hang in the airspace above my brigade. So I don't know how widely out a brigade is spaced, but regardless, 10 or more of them hovering over one brigade just gives some indication of how many of these the Russians have in operation at the moment. Talking about drones, I'm not sure if I have an image here. I might. Yeah, here we go. This is reportedly a new Ukrainian drone, a land drone, which is being called the Ironclad. It's reports that it is being produced in Ukraine. It can carry a 7.62 or a 12.7 millimeter machine gun. Sorry, wrong button. There we go. It has a carrying payload of 350 kilograms. So I guess this would be useful in like a medic assist role where you could get out to where men were injured. If there was someone capable of lifting them, then you could lift 3 or 4 guys onto this and then just send it back, stick it in reverse, send it back, and it's got a gun on the front to try to protect itself as it leaves and evacuates those soldiers. 20 kilometre top speed on road, 15 kilometres off road. It's electric and it's got 130 kilometre range on a single charge. Its remote control range is 5 kilometres, so you can get it a long way away, and that can be extended up to 10 kilometres using a repeater. Now, it doesn't say what the repeaters are, whether they are something like an all-land drone, which hovers behind it and is able to bounce the signal back, or if it's a land-based one, I don't know. Reportedly, the hull is said to withstand a 7.62 millimetre fire. And no details are available on the number produced or how many are operational at this stage, but there is a video which reports to show one of these operating in the field. The video shows it from like a drone looking down along a roadway, and this, what is said to be this ironclad drone, driving up the roadway and shooting at a target with the, I'm guessing it's the 12.7 millimeter machine gun on it. I don't know more context around that video footage, if it's accurate, if it was testing, or if it was actually real in combat footage. But it seems as though at least some of them are now operational. I have one other little thing I just want to show you here, just relating to drones. Just give me one moment. Here we go. Just we watch this. Drop me off there. Now, what that is footage of is reportedly a number of soldiers. I believe these are Russian soldiers shooting at a FPV drone, which is, maybe you can see, it's just up here in the sky here. Allegedly, it's one which is either a kamikaze or it has grenades on it, and they're shooting at it to be able to destroy it before it gets to them. Success story, I guess, for those guys against a drone. I don't know how often they are successful in stopping them with small arms fire like that. But again, just a change in warfare, something which in previous wars we wouldn't have ever considered, of men trying to shoot down small explosive kamikaze drones as they approach them. There are reports that Ukraine has just adopted a NATO logistics package. Ukraine has implemented a digital logistics platform which is aimed at fully automating its military's supply chain management and eliminating paper-based processes. So this will further align Ukraine's military with NATO systems. Obviously, NATO is the only supplier of weapon systems to Ukraine now, and what I mean by that is that they're no longer receiving Soviet equipment. They're no longer getting Soviet equipment really from, there's nothing from Russia, of course, and what they have previously received from other nations that still have Soviet equipment would be in small numbers now, I imagine, after what they've given away and what they would want to retain for themselves. So even without Ukraine joining NATO as such, it is becoming more NATO-ified as the conflict goes on, as more and more systems are adopted, more and more NATO equipment coming their way, F-16s and that sort of thing, the British tanks, the American tanks, all of that kind of thing heading their way. There's still some challenges, though, for Ukraine, even in getting stuff, though, across its borders. Romania has now started blockades. So over the last couple of months, since about November, neighbouring nations of Ukraine, including Poland, and here we've got, just go back to the map here. We've got Ukraine here. We've got Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania on the western border of Ukraine. Over the last few months, those nations have at various times and for the various periods of time enacted blockades on the entry points into Ukraine. This has primarily been done by the truckers, transport drivers, farmers have been involved also, but they've been doing this because they are encountering problems with the number of Ukrainian trucks coming across the border. And the prices at which Ukrainian transport operators are selling their services. A number of these nations here, EU nations, Ukraine not in the EU, the EU nations having agreements to protect their industry, and Ukraine seems to be able to exceed the number of trucks that are meant to be coming through. There is some sort of ticketing limiting system there. So Poland has been doing this. Romania now has started and has joined one of its crossing points. So that means over the last few months, it's Romania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary have all been engaged in this. Now, Poland, Slovakia and Hungary, I think, have all relaxed to a large extent most of their blockades at this stage, but Romania has started now. So this is an ongoing challenge for the nations to the west of Ukraine, which is the only entry and exit point of goods from Ukraine now, because they are unable to use the ports of Odessa and Mykolaiv. And that obviously causing pressure on the governments of those bordering nations, as these blockades cause challenges with things coming in, challenges with things moving into Ukraine. And other ongoing challenges for Ukraine in the EU. Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, he has not been on board with the EU narrative around the ongoing support and funding of Ukraine. There's about 50 billion euros of new financial aid which the EU would like to give to Ukraine and which Orban has been blocking. He's been using his veto power and voting rights to not vote for this. And that is causing consternation within the EU to the extent now that at least 120 members of the European Parliament's 705 members have signed a letter sent to the EU's President Robert Metsola calling for more pressure on Viktor Orban and Hungary. Those member states are meeting again on February the 1st to again try to approve the $50 billion euro package for Ukraine. And if they can't get Hungary on board, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that. So we see there that there are continued challenges for Ukraine in terms of support in multiple areas. Now, while the UK has said it will provide £2.5 billion this year, the US is still unable to provide any more funding at this stage. And the package of $64 billion, which was meant to be sent, hasn't been approved yet and is still going to go through some level of dispute with the House Republicans, who will require that the Biden administration tighten up the southern border of the United States before they get that funding. Now, I've said this in videos before, and I won't go into detail now, but that's going to be something that will be very difficult for Biden to do. So there may be a stalemate here for some time, and if there is, Ukraine will be the one suffering because it won't be getting that funding from the US, and it may not be getting its funding from the EU, which means it will have a small amount of funding from the UK to try and keep it running over the next couple of months. Very challenging for the Ukrainians. Finally, I'm just going to finish off on a little point here about the Middle East. So Benjamin Netanyahu, after 2 days of the International Court of Justice hearings, where they have been hearing South Africa's allegations of Israel conducting genocide in Gaza, with its 3-month-long bombing campaign now and the at least 23,000 killed Palestinians, large number of them, the majority of them being children and women. The South Africans have had enough of this. They've gone to the International Court of Justice and they want to charge Israel with genocide. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has come out with a statement, a televised statement, and said, "No one will stop us, not The Hague, not the axis of evil, and not anyone else." Now, so no one will stop us, not The Hague being the International Court of Justice, not the axis of evil. The axis of evil is where he's referring here to Iran and supporting nations, the Houthis, Hezbollah, that kind of thing, and not anyone else. Now, the not anyone else, I think, probably really is a finger pointed towards the US, where we have seen demonstrated here that Israel has significant control over the US's foreign policy as it relates to the Middle East. The old, what's the old aphorism of the tail wagging the dog? That is what seems to be happening here. Now, there is a lot of information coming out, if you follow Twitter or Telegram, as to why this might be, and that this might be due to the Israeli security service Mossad having information on members of the American Congress, politicians at high levels, Mossad having dirt on them, and that is used as a lever to keep the American government supporting Israel no matter what Israel does. But anyhow, Benjamin Netanyahu coming out and saying that no one will stop us in what they're doing. Netanyahu and his army chief, Herzl Halevi, have said that they have no immediate plans to allow the return of displaced Palestinians to northern Gaza. Now, 85% of the 2.3 million Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip, 85% of them have been displaced since the 7th of October. And Netanyahu and the head of his Israeli Defence Forces, Herzl Halevi, saying that they have no immediate plans to allow the return of displaced Palestinians to northern Gaza. Fighting in the northern area has been scaled back. Now, there are conflicting stories on this. There are some reports coming out that this is because the Israelis are starting to suffer higher than expected losses in this area, which is confirmed to some extent by images, video released by Hamas showing reported strikes on Merkava tanks within the areas of northern Gaza. There is also some talk that they may be withdrawing from northern Gaza because they're concerned about the threat of Hezbollah in the north of Israel, and that they are needing to pull some brigades out to strengthen their forces there in case Hezbollah does decide to become involved in this conflict. So fighting perhaps scaled back there. Also some reports that in some pockets Hamas have to reassume control in some areas there. Netanyahu said that the issue of allowing Palestinians, displaced people, back into their homes in northern Gaza has been raised by the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken during his visit last week. But Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he told Anthony Blinken that we will not return residents to their homes when there is fighting. Again, this plays into the hypothesis that really what Israel is trying to do here is to cleanse the area of Gaza in its entirety of the Palestinians. And if it doesn't do that by bombing them all and killing them all, it may do it by other means, such as in the north, destroying all of the infrastructure, destroying all of the homes, destroying all the water, destroying all the sewage, destroying all the hospital, destroying all the power generation and the water filtration, and that, leaving a wasteland there. And then perhaps saying, okay, you can return to the north, but now Hamas has moved to the south. We will be destroying Hamas in the south, and then perform the same task in the south, destroy everything so that the area is uninhabitable, leaving 2.3 million people with no ability to survive in that area until eventually, one way or another, they are forced to leave the area. There's challenges around that. Of course, Egypt, Jordan, surrounding nations don't want to let the Palestinians come to them because they believe if they do, the Israelis will never allow them back. And they will have then aided in the exodus of the Palestinians from their homeland. Terrible situation for the Palestinian people. The conflict with the Yemenis, the Houthis in Yemen, still continuing to bubble away and escalate. Likely that there will be escalations in the north of Israel with Hezbollah. So we're still at a very fractious, dangerous point at the moment where this could explode into a much wider regional conflict. If it does, that is likely to draw the Americans in further into a conflict which will, I would imagine, ultimately lead to a strategic loss for the US in the area. Because if it does become a full-throated conflict with Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, then as Israel becomes weakened in that conflict, there is the likelihood that other nations which are currently status quo or somewhat friendly with Israel, Arab nations, may decide it's time to just take the opportunity. Egypt, for example, even Saudi Arabia, Jordan may go, well, we can see that Israel's losing this. We might as well get on the winning side of this thing now and join the conflict, which perhaps would lead to a situation where either Israel loses this conflict badly and the US looks weak in the area, or results in Israel resorting to the use of its nuclear weapons to try to stave off destruction of the nation. I think we're starting to get to these scenarios as things continue to increase and expand. We're not seeing good pressure relief anywhere. Anyhow, that's where we are today. So I hope you're enjoying the channel. If you are and you think others would, please share it with others who you think would enjoy the channel. If you enjoy the channel and you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.